So hopefully I can add a little bit to everyone's headache at the end of this presentation, because I prepared a presentation that is full with maybe some hints, maybe some ideas, but some basic concepts which you're going to hear about strategy execution, what that is, why it is a problem at many companies, and where are potential remedies for solving the problem with executing on your strategic plans. So if I can share my screen, let's do that. Hey, and if you have any questions, just as Kevin pointed out, put them in the chat. And then if I get to it, and if I can't get to him right away, I will have them answered in the Q&A session later. So let's see if I can do this again, like I did before. We're good? All right. Thanks for the thumbs up, Kevin. Hey, all right. So strategy execution, it was not a term that came up in the chat when Kevin asked for a favorite term from innovation. That's not surprising because most people that are involved in innovation and product development, they don't really develop the strategic planning on the top. Nevertheless, in most companies, you need to move within the boundaries of the strategic planning of the company. And sometimes planning, or very often, as we can see from the quote here, 87% of business fail to execute their strategic plannings. Very often, there's a significant disconnect between the planning on the top floor and the execution on the shop floor, and that has a lot. There's some causes that are well researched, and there's some remedies, and we're going to talk about that. All of you will have access to that presentation. I'm going to share that with innovators, of course. I have the links for everything that I claim in that presentation, so you're going to be able to find that or research that for yourself. And I guess maybe a lot of you have already heard about that book, Why Only 13% of Companies, the 13 years it's called, successfully execute their strategies. So a few words to why am I here? Who is Sofjan? Who am I? Kevin introduced myself. I just see I did a mistake, but we can go through that. So. Yeah. Okay. A few words to Sofjan and who we work with. So this is a sample of the customers that Sofjan works with and for. You can see already that there's a lot of big names on the screen, and there's a lot of big names that we can't actually mention. So Sofjan is a software company that provides an innovation management solution, and our customer base is largely from the top 2,000 in the world. But over the last couple of years, we have actually seen a lot of companies from the mid-market that ask, like Twinseo, for example, that you can see here, that ask about our software and our services, because they run into levels of complexity and they basically face the same problems that maybe BASF has faced 15 years ago. Now, even smaller companies, because everything is global, their supplier base is global. They have to work in new ecosystems. They have to come up with new stuff faster. There's new regulations maybe that force them to become creative, right? And so these levels of complexity to boost their innovation performance, to make more revenue from new products has arrived a couple of years ago at the mid-market, and now we see a lot of customers from the mid-market joining our client base. So Sofjan, remember that we provide software, services, expertise, everything around innovation performance in product development. And that's us. And then you introduced me, Kevin, so I just went over that. We're a global company. We have several hundreds of implementations in the meanwhile. We're certified. StageGate might mean something to a lot of people here in the crowd. And I am the business development director in the DACH region, meaning that I serve our clients, our German-speaking clients in Central Europe, from like high-tech, pharmaceutical, chemical companies. So I work with a lot of these people directly, and all the tales I'm gonna tell to add a little bit of color to our presentation will be real life tales, not tales from the crypt, but tales from real life. But I can't name anyone, so it's going to be anonymized, of course. All right. So as we pointed out hold on a second. As we pointed out in the beginning, there's a significant disconnect, and that's the topic of the presentation, between strategic planning and the execution of programs, of initiatives, of projects, really. So Dan Prosser, who came up with that book, The 13 Years, that's actually some couple of years ago, but it's still valid. He called that the execution virus. And that's something that Drucker observed many years ago when he mentioned that any plan is just a nice intention unless it's really put to action. So why is there a disconnect between the plans and the execution? There's actually a number of reasons and a number of entities involved and a number of elements involved, really. And I tried to come up with a way to visualize that, and I came up with this. Sorry for that. So today what we see is, if you start top down, really, we see a top level that is doing the strategic planning. And that's the top level in any organization is very much depending on the organization. I work with large enterprises that are very centralistic. So they have a strong headquarter, a strong corporate entity that actually does all the planning. They develop their view on the future. You can see I'm using my hands quite often. Don't shy away from your screen. It's just me. So typically, I'm trying to use the mouse now. So we have a lot of in centralistic organizations. You have a strong corporate entity that provides the strategic planning and their view in the future and how the company should exploit the future, right? So in decentralized organizations, and there's many of those, like a large customer that actually published that that we work with is Pepsi, for example. And Pepsi went from a couple of years ago, because they published it, we can tell about it. They went from a very strong centralistic organization into what they called a connected autonomy of business units. So they decentralized this whole level of corporate planning and sliced it into several panes into the business segments that they have. So nowadays it's more connected autonomy, as they call it. And then, of course, every business segment, for example, the business segment that owns Asia has a different view on the reality in Asia than the headquarters in the US would have on that region, right? So the planning and the organizational view and your strategic plans, where do you want to go, what do you need for that, that's very much depending on where you're located, what region you look at, what is your market slice, and that determines what your strategic plans, how good the fit is actually with the people that you have on the ground. Talking about people on the ground, as you can see, there are hierarchies organized here, and in centralistic, it's very often like, if we talk at BASF, right? They have the headquarters in Ludwigshafen in Germany, but they have the most operations today BASF has in the world is actually in Asia, in China to be exact. So most of their workforce is in China, and of course, the view if you would be sitting in China, you would have a different view on the world and where you want to go and how you want to develop and grow in that particular environment than you have in Germany in Ludwigshafen. So there's a regular exchange program, people going back and forth between Ludwigshafen and China to get to correct that distorted view and to come up with planning that is actually in line with the perception of the people, not only in Germany, but also in China and in Asia in general. So that's the organizational part of that. And I'm just saying the planning is either done in the headquarters that might be remote from the people on the ground, or it's done more in the region or in that particular business segment that is very familiar with it in the environment, and that is then closer to the execution activities, which is already better. So my favorite word in innovation is governance. We've seen that. That came up in the chat provided by me, of course. Governance is actually the set of rules, the accountability, basically the rules on how you play your innovation game. And governance is a big issue in most companies, because very often these rules are either made up as you go along with a project or a program, or are intrinsic. So there's not a playbook externalized. They're intrinsic in the people. Only people like the board members, they understand this is the governance, how we go, while the innovation manager has a different view, the product development has a different view, engineering looks at it totally from a different angle and doesn't understand the rules. And very often we see that there is no governance in place, which results in totally delay of decision making. If there's no governance, who owns what? If there's no accountability, what are the rules? What are, for example, our investment criteria or decision criteria around risk in innovation, in product development? If that is not clear and it's not written down, it's not to be found somewhere by new guys or by people from maybe the supplier even or the customer, then there is always a delay in decision making, because people then need to discuss everything. They lack the guardrails for their decision making. And we just recently had there's a consultancy that's called 5 Eyes that organizes stage-gate seminars with Bob Cooper in Europe. And 5 Eyes did a survey, and they said the delay in decision making very often leads to project zombies. So there's a project, there's a portfolio, you can see that here, a portfolio of projects. They all meet the criteria for the next phase, so they're competing for investment, they're competing for resources, right? Resource allocation. But on a certain level, there's only so much investment, so much budget available. And so you need to have criteria in place. If you have 5 projects that all meet the criteria, but you can only fund 3. What are the criteria for these 3 that they need to meet, right? So what is your decision based on? And that's typically described in the governance. And because governance plays such an important role, and because it's very often, it's not externalized, it's not written down, it's intrinsic in people, that's because that is one of the root causes for delay in decision making, which results in delay, not only delay of game, but also in missed launches, and you miss your go-to-market points. And very often there's of course conflicts, and that results sometimes in a clash between people. That is totally unnecessary, because if there were clear rules in place, everybody could trace the decision making back to those rules, and then a lot of emotion would be put actually to rest, right? So the other stuff that you see in innovation, sometimes there are planning around regulations. Currently in Europe, we have a lot of stuff going on around circular economy and carbon, to become carbon neutral, reducing the carbon footprint. That's not because the organization is eager to become greener, not only, at least. It is mainly because regulation and rules in the European Union force companies to become greener, and there's a hefty cost involved if you still have the same carbon footprint in 10 years that you have today, right? So everybody is going for that. So you can see regulations are a strong driver of strategic planning. For a real life example, we see this with power intense industries like in chemicals, but also in steel. They need to become greener. We have customers in Austria, and Austria has the big advantage that they have a lot of resources, green energy power systems, because they have these lakes in the Alps, and they generate energy from that. So I think Austria is close to 100% green energy powered. And so steel making in Austria is now significantly more beneficial than steel making in Germany, where they need to still buy power that is generated with coal generators, right? So actually that's much more expensive. And of course, if you want to work with 2 companies that are providing similar products, you would work in any ecosystem. You would prefer to work with a company that is greener currently, right? Okay, so, oh, sorry. I missed my screen. My screen's gone. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I can't for something. Okay, so I was explaining why regulations are a strong driver for strategic planning. Now, if we go further down the hierarchies in an enterprise, the shift of what is my goal, what am I judged about, right, is shifting, because the more you go to the shop floor, the closer you go to a certain business unit, you see objectives that are more short-term and that are typically either cost or revenue or other KPI related. So that's and then it's very difficult to for these people to align on the shop floor. It's very difficult to align your objectives, which will grant you a bonus at the end of the year, to align that with the strategic plans of the company if they're not fully, if you're not really contributing and you're not getting a bonus of a long-term goal, then it's really hard to do that. So there's a conflict in that if it's not cascading clearly down.
Actually, sorry, if you want, just getting some tech support in the back. Do you see your slides yet?
No, hold on.
Sharing. and start sharing again. I think that will solve the issue.
All right, I'll do that.
Just hi HC, just take your time, and we can pause for a minute if you want to find them again.
Yeah, it's good.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks. So this disconnect between these hierarchies, and that's just a hierarchy, a disconnect between the planning activities and the information they're based on, right, and the execution activities. And then if we look at the decision making as we did before, but also if we look at two more factors that play an important role, one is time, because long-term planning, looking into 5 years into the future, versus execution short-term, looking at that one business year. And the other one is really systems. So if on the strategic level, the senior people, they really work with PowerPoint. They work with email, easily to digest email. Sometimes if they're from finance, they work with Excel a lot, like Excel everywhere and for everything. And everything else, they work with BI tools, but mostly they work with screenshots from BI tools that are put into a PowerPoint. So here, there's actually no need to connect all the data sources. Because if you look at a PowerPoint or at a PDF report, there's no need, you really need real-time data for the details. And if you want to have real-time data, or if you want to have the details from that report, you ask the person that provided the report, and then they need to drill down. Here on the execution level, there's really a need to all kind of details. In engineering, you can't run a project without all the details, very detailed. Execution activities that you need to fulfill. You need to collaborate with your suppliers, with your customers, with third party, maybe Fraunhofer for analysis of something, or third party research. So that's really cross-functional on the execution level, and there's a lot of details, and the need for synchronizing the data and integrate it to get a holistic view on what you're working at. What are the criteria? Where's the market going? What is your contribution? What is the business case? How has it changed over time? So this need is actually all on the execution items. That's why systems, integrated or synchronized systems, that's a stronger need. And failure of synchronized systems is also leading to delay in decision making. If your data quality on the execution level is not without any question, if it's not 100% data quality, if that is in question, then you can hardly make any decision about anything, right? So there's a strong need to synchronize data on the execution level, and then it will be synchronized, of course, over all the hierarchies. And the timing aspect that I mentioned is here, there is maybe a review on the strategic plans, maybe twice a year. Typically, it's just once a year. And it's starting in October, just now, until the end of the year. And then we come up with new plans, versus here, you need to make decisions any given week, any week, or in review meetings, monthly review meetings, quarterly review meetings. So the cadence of time where you need to make decisions, you can't wait. That's totally different from the planning cadence, which is only like once a year or twice a year. And all this is really asking for a disconnect, not over hierarchies, but also over time and over system synchronization. And that in most companies, that leads to the results that only 13% of companies really execute on their planned strategies. So that's a short overview, and we could go into don't be surprised, but this is actually the same slide you've seen before. But we could go into some examples. What happens when things are not synchronized? As I said, it's going to be anonymously. But what happens? For example, one of the enterprises we work with, they have seen that they have a number of projects. So the number of projects within the organization was something like 2,500 projects in product development, right? Innovation product development. Now they analyzed, so how many of these projects will actually achieve their business case and achieve value for the company? And it was like 200. So the minority of all projects were really providing way more than 80% of the value to the company. And the rest of the projects was projects we did to please a customer, an optimization project. But if that wouldn't have happened, nothing else would have happened. So it was just basically a waste of time. So what our customer did, they cut the dragon's tail, as they call it, or the lizard's tail. They cut the lizard's tail, and they concentrated their resources on the valuable projects in product development. And so they were able to actually fan out many more products than they had originally planned. And they were able to reap a lot, so tons of money, in the millions, in the hundreds of millions actually, because they cut off these low value projects. And that was only possible because they connected the execution level with the systems that provided the visibility to look into, hey, where's the value coming from? Where's that value attributed? So that's just one example. Let me go for another example, and that would, I don't want to scare you to death, but at one of my customers, they do a portfolio prioritization. So they have it's like a law of nature. You always have many more project requests than you have resources, right? Like in any company, you would have many more ideas, many more product ideas, concepts, many more project candidates that you can actually resource. You just don't have the budget, you don't have the people that can work on. So one of my customers, they did a portfolio prioritization once a year, and it took them, because so many entities are involved, engineering is involved, innovation is involved, regulation, of course, sales would have a say, and then senior management. So it took them like 3 weeks before everybody could agree this would be the portfolio they would be working with for the next 12 months. And then they do a portfolio freeze, which is great for the people that got budget and got resourced and staffed. But it's, of course, a nightmare for new ideas, because it means all of your resources are buried for 1 year until the next reprioritization is done. And that, I think, that is very typical. That is something we see in product development in a lot of customers that have are engineering heavy. Once there is a decision made that they're going to go with that portfolio of projects, then basically they are locked for a long time, which means new initiatives are very often understaffed, or don't get the resources that they should actually own, right, to get advanced. Okay, let me pause here, see if there's still anyone in the session, and let's see where we are, and if I can share some more tales, or if you want to open up the discussion, Kevin.
Great. Maybe for this part, we can stop sharing the screen that we can see everyone's face again.
Stop share. Yes, sir. Here
All
we
right.
go. Wow, we have hardly lost any people.
No, everyone is still here.
I need to work on my scare skills.
So maybe there weren't a lot of questions typed during the chat, but I'm sure there are lots of questions popping in your head. I know I have lots of questions. I want to give everyone the chance to, write their question or put up the, hand up feature in Zoom. Or just go on unmute. In the meantime, I can start with a question that I had mentioned. So, HC, thank you, by the way, for the wonderful presentation. You mentioned somewhere in your presentation that there were a lot of implicit governance rules.
Yeah.
That the board looks at it one way, the product manager maybe look at it another way, engineering. Can you give some concrete examples of these ways that these different perspectives are looking at governance? What are some of the rules that they're interpreting and how are they different?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for asking that. So I guess anybody who's in product development knows what a scorecard is, right? Mm-hmm. So you score different aspects of a new idea of an initiative or product development or new product. So what we see regularly in project review meetings is that there's maybe like two senior people that totally disagree because the guy from finance, he wants to understand the business case a lot better, and he has a lot of detailed questions, even in early phases of product development, where we all know it's just you work with assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. Because if it's really a new product for a new market, there is no experience and there are no hard financials. But the finance guy, for example, he says, if we have a rating system from 1 to 7 and it needs to be a 5 before we get funding, right? So if the financial data is not there, he would give it like a 2, so it never gets funding, right? While the innovation guy says, look, there's a market opportunity. There are unmet needs that we can actually fulfill with that product. Therefore, I rate that as with a 7, right? So it should get funding. And then for the innovation guy, it would be natural. So it's a different approach, right? And they all think, the innovation guy thinks he has the last say, whereas the finance guy thinks he has the last say. So what we suggest is that there is a scoring system and then there's a weighting factor. And in the early phases, for example, financial information is weighted less. So that actually the innovation approach is weighted higher. And over when the product becomes more concrete and you're more towards production and manufacturing and then launch, the higher the financials are weighted. So that actually it makes sense to have a lean manufacturing system, right? That to save costs there makes absolutely sense and needs to be installed to be profitable. And the innovation aspects is weighted less the further you advance your system. So scorecards are a great way of that you can apply in a process at different decision-making points, where you can actually, first of all, detect discrepancies in the approach of your senior management. But if you apply that correctly, you would also have an explanation on the scorecard, where in the early phases, the finance guy is reminded and we, as a software company, we have like a tip over, right? So if you tip over that field, it says in that phase, financial information is weighed less than the other guy's opinion because, right? And so that's explained. And that would be an example how governance, the rules by which we play, how governance is made is externalized and is made apparent for the people that are voting in the system, right? Yeah. So by using these scorecards and explaining what are they used for.
It's a great segue, by the way, to one of the questions that just popped up in the chat. Danny is asking, isn't there a chance that we may be missing out on a potential good innovative project by applying metrics and KPIs that are not applicable to innovative ideas? I don't know, Danny, if you want to clarify your question.
Where's Danny? Hello.
Hi, I'm over here.
Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Hey.
What I meant is sometimes we tend to kill ideas or potential innovative projects just because they don't fit in with the KPIs that we would normally use in our BAU, right? So how do we avoid falling into that trick?
I'm excited about that because that's a problem many people have, right? You either have something very innovative and you can be really excited. So that could be a game changer, maybe for a whole industry or for a market segment or for a clients group. And then you can't get funding because it's just not in line with other stuff. So what we typically would suggest is to follow a concept that's called strategic buckets. Have you heard of that? Strategic arenas, strategic buckets, where you from all of your innovation budget, you set aside portions for more innovative projects, right? And so that because there's actually, if you are a company in full swing, you will need to do a lot of product optimizations. So these are must-do projects anyway. But you need to set aside a budget and resources to do more innovative projects, as you just described, to have the next big thing. So, and that's also a must. If you don't, any company that doesn't do that will dry out in the long run. So it's a must do. And if you clearly define, that's also part of the governance thing. What are the rules? What are your strategic buckets? And a typical distribution of budget is like 80-20 or 70-30, right? 70 for product optimization, 30% for innovative stuff, so that you make sure you have covered your behind, if you want, and your business plans, and you still have the possibility to outperform the competition. Does that answer your question somewhere?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Dankeschön.
Sehr gern. Very nice.
So maybe if someone to unmute and ask a question, I think that worked really well rather than going with the chat. So who else has been curious?
If we're short of questions, I can still. So a recent survey, for example, of a consultancy found that there is also a disconnect, just as Danny described, where there's a disconnect between the KPIs for innovation and the innovative ideas. Very often we see a disconnect in ideation collection. Like there's great ideas, there's campaigns, and hundreds of ideas are collected, and then there's a totally disconnect with the product development process. And then these ideas that are already collected and people were engaged with the innovation community, and then these ideas are lingering around in an Excel file or in a database. And I can see you smile, Danny. So you know that situation. And one of my favorite war stories is when on an innovation conference, the head of innovation management from a large DAX corporation in Germany publicly mentioned that they now ran 3 ideation campaigns. They generated hundreds of ideas. And in the end, after they look back, what have they achieved? Not one product was commercialized, not one, from hundreds and thousands of ideas that they collected in these campaigns. And so what happened there is the disconnect. So they weren't thinking things through. when they collected the campaigns, the ideation, the campaigner, the ideation guy, his KPI was actually the number of ideas that he can collect, right? The number of ideas. And the commercialization was not a KPI at that early stages. So it was all about get us enough ideas so that we can fill our funnel. And then they had no methodology that they could apply where they score, and prioritize these ideas so that they could actually come up with, like, if you say, like, I think it was 3,000 ideas. If you bring that down to 50 project candidates, of which you then fill into the product development funnel, so that at the end you come out with 5 products that provide value for the company, right? So that would be something. And I've seen a company recently that is also that's accessible through YouTube, where the Bosch Innovation group, Bosch Innovation, I think it's an own legal entity, Bosch Innovation something, and they described their innovation process, how they drill down. So they clearly said, we started 2 years ago, we started with the funnel of 200 ideas, and then we gave them a little bit of funding, we evaluated the concepts, and after 2 years, we're down to 5 that will receive startup funding, and from that 5, we expect 2 that will be profitable in another couple of years. So this is a typical innovation funnel where the ideation phase is connected with commercialization, and very often we see that there's a totally disconnect between these two things: ideation, generating ideas to solve problems or to address unmet market needs, versus I have a commercial product in the place and it brings in great revenue.
Oh, I see. Maybe Carlos back.
Yeah. Question here. I'd say you've been mentioning. Thank you so much for kind of relaying a lot of these touch points. You've been relaying a lot of this connection between finance and, to some extent, the ideation process. Right. And the last example, the timeline stretch was like 2 years almost, and then after 2 years, we filtered up to some point. You mentioned as well, like the different weighting, like weighting finance early and innovation.
Yeah.
What are some of the, I would say, thresholds that you've seen kind of come into play to create this balance? So at which stage you increase the weighting? You would say a year? Is it a timeline? Is it a certain metrics you're looking for? Because, navigating these, I would say, negotiations is by itself the own challenge as you're trying to move it along the line. 3 years is a good timeline, for example, to say we funnel through and this can go into the concept and this is known. What has been your experience around that?
Yeah, thanks, Carlo. If you remind yourself of the presentation we just been through, right? There's really great benefits if your value system and the system from your strategic plans. So what are you aiming at? What is your strategy as a company, right? Is trickled down, is cascading down into the rules for product development and innovation. So first of all, everything you generate in ideas, you must be sure it is in line with where your company wants to go. Just a quick example: I had there's a company. They are a bulk chemical provider, and someone in the organization had the idea to create an app for something, and it was easy to do and stuff. So they came up with that app, but then they realized they have no access to the target market. They have no distribution channels. They can't sustain the app, right? Because the guy from their IT did it in his free time, but then what? So they realized they can't do anything with it. It's maybe a great app for someone, but it's not for that company. So that should have not been developed in that environment, right? So just telling you that, and that's an example of strategic fit, how important that is. And if you have a strategic fit and you have the KPIs in place, then you can actually work with the budgets that get assigned for innovation. And if you slice them into strategic buckets and in strategic arenas and regions and what have you, and you growth market segments where you want to grow, right? If you have all this in place, it almost creates a matrix where where are the little squares where you actually want to grow. And what we very often see is that people have too many projects in squares where they actually don't want to grow, but they have no project in squares where they strategically they say they want to grow, but there's actually no project. So there will be no product. And that's something we see very often, and we help with a methodology to link the plans and the KPI systems. Today's it's called OKR, objectives, whatever, and so it trickles down into your execution and operational planning, right? So and that's how we help customers. Oh, okay.
Cool. So thank you, HC, for the session, and thank you all for joining us. Indeed, Abby has just posted a link in the chat to the next session, so it's a time for our session now.
Oh, are we done already?
We are done, unfortunately. Please share insights from the session with any of your peers on the community platform. We want you typing and chatting about this, of course. And if you have any questions, feel free to add them there too. And indeed, the link is in the chat for the next session. So enjoy the rest of the day.
Hey, thanks for having me. A great pleasure. Thanks, Carlo. Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Kevin, for see you next time around, right? Have a good one. Bye-bye.